You are listening to The Place We Find Ourselves. I'm Adam Young, and this is episode 19. Today I interview my friend Jason. We begin by talking about what prompted him to engage his story, to take it seriously, and there's a lot in between, but we end with how Jason came to realize the importance of having a posture of kindness toward himself as a boy. This is the second to last episode of season 1. There will be one more next week, and then I'll be taking a break to plan out season 2 and to record more content. The first episode of season 2 will be released on October 1st. By the way, if there is a topic or a question you would like addressed in season 2, please email me at adamyoungcounseling@gmail.com, and I will hopefully be able to address it. Here is Jason with a slice of his story.
How did you learn? When did you learn that you even had a story?
Probably almost 20 years ago. I moved up to Grand Rapids from, we used to live in Lower Michigan. And my brother had started a company in Grand Rapids here and offered a position or a share of the company for my wife and I to move up and help out on. And so it was difficult leaving what I was at because I had a very solid and very secure job, and we had a 2-year-old, so we'd be moving without insurance, just starting. So as that went on, I fell into a deep depression because it was so new, and I had no idea that I would respond the way I did, and neither did my wife. And so it was very hard, very difficult for her in the move because I had completely switched on her and fell into it, just like I said, deep depression. And so one day, my parents came to our house, and we sat in the living room. And I had just finished up with some dishes. I sat on a couch. As soon as my butt hit the cushion, I had the sense that this wasn't just a normal visit. And it wasn't, as it turns out. It was more like an intervention. I was showing up in my relationship with my wife extremely angry, anxious, depressed, shut down.
Is that what you would say is what put you over the edge as far as beginning to engage your story, that experience?
I would say that experience was number one. I was like, okay, because when I heard that, I was like, okay, there's a chance that this could change. So I think that part of it was someone giving me permission to actually engage it. Because I think when I after that, my secondary response was, how will I ever get out of the story? If I go there, how will I ever be? Who will take me out of it? Because I just had this, and again, I think this my person is like this catastrophic thinking of it's going to be the worst and it's never going to end. And I think that contributed to some of where I was at the time.
So right off the bat, there's a sense of, I mean, even with your language of who will kind of pull me out, there's a sense of if you start to engage this, you'll be sucked under.
Yeah, like a wave. Like I won't be able to get my head above the water because I think also I had this illusion that I was controlling my life, like that I could actually control what was happening, and that move really upended that thought process or that belief. And I had been brought up having to know what the next thing that was going to happen, or so that I was always ahead of, we always called it the boogeyman. So there was a huge level of paranoia that I was always trying to get one step ahead of. And in my story, I've been trained that way. I've been trained to always stay one step ahead and never be caught with your quote unquote pants down.
So say a bit more about that. So, I mean, even as you say that, it's clear that there's story behind those convictions.
I think the most clear story I have of the initial learning that was when I was probably 13 or 14 years old. I couldn't drive yet, so I always drove my ATV to work. We lived on the edge of a suburb, and the rest was like all country, all fields. And so I would drive my ATV to work. And that's how I got to work. And then I would sandblast on metal during the day in the heat outside. And so I had this hood on, super hot, and you had to wear long sleeve flannel shirts or something to keep the sand from bouncing back on you. And so that to say, I really hated the job. I really didn't like being under the hood. And one time I was coming in for more sand, and I was getting it out of the 55-gallon barrel drum slowly so I could have more time in the shade and the coolness of the shop. And I could see my dad, who I was working for, he owned a company back then, and I could see him at the other end of the shop, and I could always tell when my dad was mad because he had this look on his face, and as a kid, I just always knew, just read it in his face. And from across the shop, I could see it. And he caught my eyes, and I could feel it in my body that he knew I was not doing my job. So there was just, even in that, getting the sand and taking a respite was not doing my job. So, it just lives in my body. So he comes out towards me across this long shop, this pretty like 3 or 4 bays, and I could feel my body tightening up and getting ready for the onslaught of, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? He was very intense. He was, taller than me, so that his gaze was down on me. And in this intensity that he had, if you don't get to work, you're going to be a bum. And that phrase, I believe, just drove me from that point till today. I mean, it's not gone anywhere. It's still there. But I think that was a huge contributor, and stories like that through my childhood and into my adulthood. I think I always contextualize or always heard things through that filter.
So are you saying, and I know you are, but just to make sure I'm hearing you right, that a simple sentence, I mean, a dozen words, decades ago, mm-hmm. from your father set a trajectory for how you operated in the world?
Yeah. And I wouldn't have known it fully unless I actually, I think the move was just like the spark that just ignited that fuel that was under the surface for so many years. And luckily I had parents who were journeying on their own story. So my dad had started to do some work, and I think it made it easier for them to see it in me, because he started to dip his toe into what it was like for us as kids, might have been like us for us as kids, living with that kind of an attitude or way of being that he was discovering about himself. So that when he sat down and told me that, it was like someone who knew me. And that was like really the first time my dad had ever sat down and say, "Hey, I see you."
Mm-hmm. And so that sets you off on that's a shift in your story, mm-hmm. in your narrative. And as the trajectory shifts, what obstacles got in the way of you continuing to engage your story from that point forward?
Well, there's one, I don't know if this is an obstacle, but I remember sitting after that initial conversation and say, "Hey, there's this class at church called Retelling that it'd be a good start." And so there was provision to start. And after I had signed up, it hadn't gone yet. We hadn't done the first session yet. I was on the toilet and thinking about what I was said yes to, and where it would go. And I remember sitting on a toilet just bawling, like all of this pent up anxiety that I had nowhere to go up until then, for the first time, just let out. It just, I couldn't hold it anymore. It was, and I didn't know how to stop it. And so that was like, for an obstacle for me was, I am about to jump in an ocean of unknown emotion, unknown stories, and where will it take me, and how will I ever ever come out of it.
Yes.
The word overwhelming or just a tidal wave of unknown petrified me.
Yes.
And I had not heard or been with men who had gone to that depth of pain up until then. So it was completely unknown to me. No one had ever really set a precedent of what this looked like or what I could expect to come out of it.
Mm-hmm. I think what you're putting words to, just the notion that on the one hand, you're just beginning to consider the possibility that you have a story. And on the other hand, there's so much emotion in your body that says there's something big here, even though I may not know what exactly it is. It was like your body, the tears, the sobbing, bore witness to there's something really big inside of me.
Yeah, and the body, and I've learned since, when I was a boy standing by that barrel with the sand, my body knew what was coming, probably before I even could put words to it. And sitting on that toilet that day and just letting the weight of all of that, and my body was just like, finally, I can speak. I can manifest all the stuff that you've been carrying for so many years.
And so you began to engage your story in a group context of the ministry at your church, Retelling.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story in and of itself. So the way this set up was there's two group leaders, and there's probably a group of four, maybe five, and I think that was all men in my group at that time, I believe. And I was there, of course, ready to work and fix it. Let's just sit down and say the words we need to say, and let's get this fixed.
All right.
So that at the end of 9 sessions, I will be good to go.
Right.
That's my early 30 thinking, right? And so the other thing that was crazy was my dad was one of my leaders
Oh my gosh.
because there were so few leaders at the time, especially men leaders. And his fishing buddy was his co-leader. But at the time, I don't know that I could have told you that would be an issue because I didn't realize my dad was such a huge part of my story. So at the time, I was like, okay, whatever, it's fine. I guess this is the way it is. And his buddy was so good at slowing me down and asking me more pointed questions. And as he did so, he could tell that my dad was my biggest pinch point, or my wounds were biggest there, and the biggest stories. And so at one point, he told me to go next to my dad, sit next to him, and turn my chair towards him and tell him where he missed me. And I just remember my body going, do not say a word. Do not turn your chair. And then I'm thinking back to my toilet scene going, yes, but I need something. And so I turned my chair. I turned my chair to him, and I started to say whatever I could remember, whatever had come up. And this gentleman had primed me a little bit on some of the things. And so as I started to talk, more came out. And I don't know that, and I wasn't even aware of half the stuff that came out of my mouth until I started to talk. And somehow talking just kept it coming. And I remember watching my dad's eyes, and his face his whole body just kind of drooped, and he started weeping. And I had never seen my dad cry before. And just the tenderness and the passionate gaze that he gave me, and it was so amazingly intense. It was freeing because my body was letting go of so much tension that it had never had a chance to do before. And my dad said at the end, he said, I don't remember the things that you just said, but I believe you. And it was like, I realized I didn't need him to remember those things, but to believe me was so big, because I felt like, am I just being a complete pansy about all this stuff? Like, like, should this stuff matter? And shouldn't I just be able to get over it? And at one point during one of the sessions, I said, well, can't we just go fishing together and then just have it all be good, like from then on? And and his the other leaders like, it doesn't work that way. He was amazing. Yeah, and if he was spoke so many good words as a man
Mm.
into my life in those sessions. And being with the other men in the group, I noticed that we were all in the same boat. I was by far the youngest person in that group, and they were putting words to what I was feeling and where I was at. And I remember sitting there going, "Oh my God, you feel that way too?" I thought it was just me. Like, so it started to be normal, a normalizing of, hey, we can talk about this and it doesn't discount you or disqualify you.
So I'm pulled back to your chair turned towards your dad, and what seems to be a massive amount of ambivalence in that moment between the overwhelming need to get stuff out from the toilet seat to, I don't know that I can say these words to my father or what will happen. And it just seems as to be a profound moment of courage.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think courage is a good word. And I think I was so scared that if I didn't say anything, none of it would go away.
It feels like one of those moments. I don't know if it was 5 minutes or 25 minutes, but it's a moment that makes you believe in the reality of the resurrection.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, as you told it, I'm tearing up with just longing for that's life. Like that is so holy. When a father is undone by the courage of his son to speak true words about their relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think my dad was longing for that. And I think, yeah, just to hear those words, that the honesty, like you were saying, is, I don't know that he would have known he was longing for that, the total, but I think both of us just found something new that was in our hearts that day that we would have never, ever have touched had this not been I don't know, just everything aligned for this to happen. And it was, we were intentional about doing that, but yeah, it's true. I think the just the rawness of, he knew it was there because he, as I'm talking in group, I'm sure he was hearing stories going, keep going there. Like I could just, if as a father myself, it's like I'd want my son to just keep digging into that one spot that I resisted so much, or that they're resisting so much. It's because it will bring you back. It will bring you back.
The gift of your father's fishing buddy is, it cannot be underestimated. I mean, here's a man who's midwifing a new birth of a new relationship, and facilitating and creating an environment where profound healing was occurring. So I imagine, I think it's fair to say that many of our listeners don't have a great deal of either hope in the near term, or much less hope over the course of their lives, of having a conversation like that as the beginning point of them engaging their story. So what would you say to someone who's thinking, okay, I want to start looking at my story. I know something of what Jason's talking about when he says he was overwhelmed with sobbing, and he knew there was something big there. But I can't just go and sit down and talk to my dad or my mom. What were some of the other ways you began to engage your story apart from talking to your dad? And what would you say to people that are wanting to begin to do that?
For me, in groups, as I started, and my dad was only the first group leader, and at the end of my first group, one of the leaders had asked the whole, everyone, hey, what did you discover? What's going on for you? It's like, I feel more screwed up now than when I started. I felt more undone after our first 9-week session than I had ever felt in my life.
Right. So I know you're mid answer, but I just want to pause you and say, can you say more about that? That feels really important and counterintuitive. And frankly, one of the reasons that I think a lot of people shy away from doing this kind of work is because they have a sense that that might happen to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was my fear. It was like, I'm going to go through all this emotional sludge and it's not going to be any better.
Right.
So the leader of the whole retelling group said, and she looked, as I said this and I was done, I at this point, I was brutally honest with everything. I was like, I'm just letting everything out. And she's kind of looking at me like, what did you just say to this whole group? Like, that's not what I wanted to hear. But she was so good. And she said, it sounds like you came to this group with the ground was so hard. And now there's a crack that something can grow. And so I was very hard. I was shut down, and now things could start moving around. So that undoneness was just a space for something else, a new story to come into, where it hadn't been before, because there had been no space. I had my story so tight and so confined and condensed in my body that it had nowhere to go. So let's say someone doesn't have their father, doesn't have an abuser to go and talk to and resolve things with. And a lot of people can't go to their abuser or can't go to the person who wounded them most, much less, parents. But I think the act of actually speaking it out and having someone bear witness to it is so healing. And it gets your body a place to let it go, to speak of it, to feel it in a new way. Up until that point, you've probably come up with a lot of strategies to make life work or to manage what your body's trying to tell you, what your heart knows to be true, but you won't acknowledge it. And those are the things that were true for me. And now, after going through groups or talking, I can't unknow it. And so I get to be with it. The it is the story. There are times where I'm very hard on my story, which I would say I'm very hard on that little boy.
Mm.
And it comes out, and my wife, knowing my story, will say, hey, what would kindness look like right now? And it's such a great reminder of how hard I can be on myself. And I don't need my dad anymore for that. I can do that myself. I think having someone hear you and still see you and still look at you, because I'm so taken by when I shared my story and had no clue what I was saying and the shame that I felt as I was saying it, to look up and see 4 or 5 people completely engaged with me with their eyes, and they're totally with me. Have my wife now, she will play with me. So it's just been huge for us and she invites me to play. And it's hard for me to play at times, and she knows that. And so she's such a great provision, because she will play with where I'm in despair when I'm going into a dark space and she's like, hey, you're okay. I see you. It's so good.
I mean, in those senses, Kim, your wife, is she's engaging with you as a man, but she's also kind of inviting the boy to play.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
And so you brought up your war with being harsh on the boy. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by the boy?
So the spaces where I go, where I felt the same feelings as the boy. So my body still holds remnants of those stories, those episodes. They haven't gone anywhere. Like, they're still in me. There will be times where I will be in a situation today, and I will say that the context today is the same as the context when I was a little boy. And I will bring that little boy to this context today. And I'll say, I have no resource. I have no, I will stand in shame as if people are against me. Like when I was a little boy, that's how I felt. So I will bring that same thinking or belief to the situation today. And then if I catch myself in that, I'll say, damn it, I'm doing it again. Like there's a lot of contempt over this stuff still happens rather than saying, oh, there it is again. And okay, I see you. We're going to be all right. Now I can shift because now I have it. It doesn't have me. So that's where the kindness comes in. It's like, it's okay. You're you. Your story is with you wherever you go. And it's will I, Jason, hold it in a kindness way, or will I hold it in a contemptuous way? It's like, I'm still doing this crap as a little boy I did. And so and in that, I'm condemning the little boy for thinking that.
What you're really talking about is your posture towards the younger you, that you carry him with you now as an adult man, and you can feel things at times, particularly when stress goes up. You can feel younger.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that if someone was sitting next to me and who knew me and could say and saw how the stress or how I'm acting or what I'm saying or how I'm saying it, said, "Hey, how old do you feel right now?" I mean, I would have to say I feel like I'm 12 years old, standing in the shop, looking at my dad come. Like my psyche or my body is feeling the same feelings as I did as a boy.
Can we shift gears for a minute? Because you've talked a fair bit about your dad. What about your relationship with your mom?
Growing up, my mom and I had a relationship where I would be her surrogate husband. Like I would be the one who sat by the bed, or she would come in and sit by my bed and she would tell me things, and probably things that she should have just shared with her husband. Okay. Or with a girlfriend. Times when she was in bed, some of the beautiful times where I would go and entertain her while she was sick in bed for 6 weeks. So there's a huge connection for us in that. She truly delighted in having me in the room while she was flat on her back, couldn't do anything. So to have someone in the room, for me to be that person, there was a connection. And there's times where she could have stuck up for me and my siblings with my dad. Typical would be one instance, I was going out the door and she held, like, I was in an all out brawl with my dad, like words flying. I was pissed. He was pissed. We were having it out. And she held up the door to go outside because I was ready to leave and she knew it. So she's holding the door open because I probably had to go somewhere. She held the door open. And as I was passing the threshold where she was standing, she goes, "Just don't grow up to be like him someday." And at the time, I was just like, whatever, because I was so pissed off. But I remember that phrase. And the reason I remember that phrase, I think, is I'm not going to do anything about this. So you just take it and don't replicate it. And so there was a definite I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to get in the way of this. And my role that I had in our family was the tension at the dinner table would be so thick, and I would address it. Like I took on the role of addressing the thing that no one wanted to talk about. And more often it was because I was so pissed off that no one would talk about it, and that they were just being childish about whatever was going on. And so I got myself into a lot of bad scenarios or bad situations with my dad because I would let him have it at the dinner table in front of his wife and say things that they wouldn't say, which, put me in the middle often. And I feel often pulled back into that role, even today. which I can't always see. And my wife points it out and says, hey, it's happening again. And I didn't want to see it at first because I was like, whatever, because it was so thick in me. It was so, hey, this is my role. This is my duty. So, I'm going to do it well. And she said, she's like, no, you actually don't have to do it at all. And it'd be best if you didn't. So I agreed. And it's just so amazing how compelling or how pulled I am back into that role and how easily I could slide back into it.
Thank you for putting words to the bind that you were in with your mom as you were asked to be her surrogate spouse. And what a gift your wife, Kim, gives to you by continuing to speak into your heart and your story in those places. We're coming to the end of our time, but one last question. Who are some of the voices that have spurred you on to continue to engage your story?
Another part of my story was the women in my life that were a part of Retelling would speak to me and call out my tenderness and encourage me or say, hey, you are both tender and strong. Like there's both in you. Will you let the tenderness enhance your strength? Like they're both strength. And I never really put those two together. Both can be true and both are true. And so the women that I had resisted for years in the ministry would not turn away. That, it didn't work on them. My constantly pushing them away did not work. Thank God. They saw right through it. And so they kept my gaze, they kept pursuing me and kept calling me to both. And so to be that with other women, I found was very difficult. And it's been good. It's been good to be a strong, tender man with other women other than my wife and have that be okay and have that be beautiful. Relatively new thing for me in the last maybe 5 or 6 years.
And so these women, they blessed you by naming your tenderness.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that when that first happened, you weren't fond of it.
No. Yeah, because I think I always associated myself as an angry person. Angry and tough and strong. Like that's me. That's what I do. and the tenderness and of who I also am kept leaking out, and they saw that, and they saw that I was trepid about showing both or showing that part and saying, hey, this could be true too. It is true. It's just, will you accept it? Will you embrace it? Will you?
Yeah. Isn't it both odd and incredibly annoying that our glory somehow leaks out, and as much as we're not fond of it, it leaks out and then other people see it. And there are some courageous people that will actually name it in so doing, both bless us and invite us to step into owning it more fully.
And it's unusual in our society and our culture. And it leaks out. Again, it's like this fantasy that I think it doesn't show. We're image bearers and it can't not show. We leak it. Thank God we leak it. And thank God there's other people that will see it and call us out on it.
Well, Jason, thank you for your vulnerability, for your willingness to step into your own story and to share it with our listeners. It was truly a gift. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Be sure to visit theplacewefindOurselves.com, where you can sign up for my email list and or subscribe to future podcast episodes. Music for this podcast was provided by Rick Wilson. Thank you, Rick. As always, if you found this episode meaningful, please share it with your friends. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.